Hello, and welcome to Nutshelf History. You might be wondering exactly what is affirmative action. Well, you'll have to sit back and listen to find out. Many of the organizations that formed the core of the civil rights movement, including the Congress of Racial Equality, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and the American Civil Liberties Union, promoted the idea that help was needed to overcome centuries of racial discrimination. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy issued Executive Order 10925, which created the Committee on Equal Employment Opportunity and mandated that projects funded with federal money must make affirmative action to ensure that employment and hiring practices were free from racial bias. Executive Order 10925 says it is the obligation of the United States government to promote and ensure equal opportunity for all qualified persons, without regard to race, creed, color, or national origin, employed or seeking employment with the federal government and on government contracts. On September 24, 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson issued Executive Order 11246. This said the contractor will take affirmative action to ensure that applicants are employed and that employees, as well as students, as colleges began to open their doors to minority students, allowing them to enter previously unavailable professions, treated during employment without regard to their race, color, religion, sex, or national origin.
Previously, in 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, banning discrimination in the workplace. Congress established the EEOC to enforce the new law. This led to surprisingly vast success as lawsuits and enforcement of this act came into play. Colleges began to open their doors to minority students, allowing them to enter previously unavailable professions, including medicine, law, and accounting.
According to supporters of affirmative action, there are 3 myths that go along with affirmative action. The first is that we don't need affirmative action anymore. Though progress has been made, people of color and women are still more likely to be unemployed, employed at lower wages, and hold jobs with a lower base pay. According to 1998 U.S. Department of Labor statistics, blacks are almost twice as likely as whites to be unemployed. The unemployment rate is also higher for Latinos than for whites. Blacks and Latinos generally earn far less than whites. In 2000, the median weekly income for blacks was $459. For Latinos, it was $395, while for whites, it was $590. A second myth is that affirmative action favors people of color and women, leading to reverse discrimination. Affirmative action merely enables people who might otherwise be shut out to get their foot in the door. Affirmative action permits factors such as race, gender, and national origin to be considered when hiring or admitting qualified applicants, keeping the door to opportunity open. A third myth is that affirmative action rewards the unqualified. The real myth is that we have an equal playing field and that the most qualified people are the ones who get ahead. In fact, affirmative action helps to offset barriers that unfairly block the pathway of qualified Americans who are fully able to succeed. In so doing, it promotes equal opportunity. The world is full of people whose talents are not always recognized by traditional measures of intelligence. As an example, although he went on to be one of the most gifted speakers of the 20th century, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. scored very poorly on a standardized test in his youth. Research has shown that such tests and similar criteria are often biased and underestimate the capabilities of working-class individuals, women, and people of color, and that they do not accurately predict professional or educational success.
The 1978 Supreme Court case Bakke was the first case before the Court of Affirmative Action in Higher Education. In 1973, Alan Bakke, a 33-year-old white male who applied to 12 medical schools, had been a National Merit Scholar in high school and graduated from the University of Minnesota with a GPA of 3.51. All 12 schools rejected his application, including the University of California, Davis School of Medicine. At that time, UC Davis had a program for affirmative action. The school had 100 seats available to applicants, 16 of which were specifically for blacks, Asians, and American Indians, under an affirmative action program. UC Davis created a separate admissions process for those 16 seats alone. Bakke sued the regents of the University of California based on the fact that these 16 seats were off limits for him based on race and that minorities had been admitted to fill these 16 seats with lower academic scores than Bakke. He sued to have the state force UC Davis to admit him.
The Supreme Court heard the case in 1978. The strongest contention by the University of California in countering the lawsuit was the justification of affirmative action by the good of diversity in the classroom. UC Davis's admissions procedure was designed to increase diversity. The court ultimately held that affirmative action programs are constitutional. However, quota systems such as that established by UC Davis were unconstitutional. The state could enact programs that preference the application of minority candidates in the name of campus diversity, but they could not reserve a certain number of seats for minority applicants and use the entirely different admission process. Bakke is significant for its role as the first case the Supreme Court decided that referenced affirmative action policy in higher education. The court did not establish a precise ruling, but opened the door for future debates on affirmative action.
The American Civil Liberties Union puts a good perspective on affirmative action. In debates on affirmative actions, critics often say that its policies give some runners an unfair head start in an otherwise fair race. At the same time, many supporters of affirmative action say we need these policies to assist disabled runners. In their focus on the runners rather than the track, both of these perspectives miss the point. Affirmative action isn't about advancing disabled runners, but about repairing damaged lanes and removing the barriers that block the pathways to opportunity that only some runners face. Affirmative action is not only a story of history, but also relevant today. According to Business Week 2001, racial incidents still occur in the workplace. Companies such as Texaco and Boeing were being charged with racism by employees. In 2004, John Deere was forced to recruit minority and women dealers. In 2005, Abercrombie & Fitch was forced to pay $40 million to African American, Latino, and Asian female employees. Let's take a look at Obama's point of view on affirmative action.
Level playing field. Everybody's competing, and we've dealt with some of the legacies of discrimination that have resulted in substandard schools or extreme poverty in some communities. Then affirmative action ends up being an afterthought, and we can really just make sure that everybody's treated fairly in an environment that in which race is rarely taken into account.
Affirmative action has had a controversial history since President Kennedy issued his executive order in 1961. Conservatives saw affirmative action as a zero-sum game that opened doors to employment, promotions, and education for minorities, while at the same time shutting those doors to better qualified whites. Some conservatives were upset by what they saw as minorities playing professional victim, while at the same time obtaining a free ride in the American system. Many liberals, however, believe that affirmative action can still be beneficial. As historian Roger Wilkins pointed out, in the 375-year history of the colonization of North America, blacks were slaves for 245 of those years, free but still legally discriminated against for 100 years, and in only the most recent decades have they lived under something else. It takes time for a culture to accept and incorporate new values. The concept of affirmative action is still in its infancy and is still evolving.